Hello and welcome back. I'm from the private Audiobooks channel, and in this video, we'll be discussing emotional control and mental discipline. Whether you're sleeping, commuting after work, or wherever and however you get the information, it doesn't matter anymore. Just put on your headphones and enjoy this audiobook video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel to be notified of future daily audiobook videos. You can also find previous audiobook videos in the 2-hour audiobooks playlist on the cards. Ready? Let's get started. Chapter 1: How the Reactive Mind Works. There is a moment that exists between what happens to you and what you do about it. Most people never see this moment. They experience something, they react, and they believe this is simply how life works. Someone says something cutting, and anger rises. A notification appears, and attention shifts. A memory surfaces, and the body tightens. The reaction feels like it is you, as if there is no separation between the trigger and the response. But this is not the truth of how you are built. It is simply the truth of how you have been conditioned. Your mind is not designed to pause. It is designed to survive. And survival, for most of human history, did not require reflection. It required speed. When your ancestors heard a sound in the brush, the ones who stopped to contemplate the philosophical implications of rustling leaves did not live long enough to pass on their genes. The ones who ran, who reacted without thinking, those are the ones whose nervous systems you inherited. This is not a flaw in your design. It is the reason you are here. But it is also the reason you suffer in a world that no longer threatens you with predators, yet continues to activate you as if it does. The brain operates on a simple principle: what has kept you alive before will be repeated. Every time you encounter a situation that resembles something from your past, your nervous system runs a pattern. It does not ask whether this pattern is still useful. It does not check whether the situation is actually dangerous. It simply executes. This is what we call a reaction. It is automatic, immediate, and it happens beneath the level of conscious thought. You do not choose it. It chooses you. When someone criticizes your work, your heart rate increases. Your jaw tightens. Your thoughts begin to construct a defense or a counterattack. This response is not happening because of what was just said. It is happening because of what was said to you years ago, perhaps when you were young and your sense of self was still forming. That earlier moment created a neural pathway, a kind of internal shortcut that says, criticism equals danger, respond accordingly. And so you do. Not because you are weak, not because you lack discipline, but because your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It is protecting you from a threat that no longer exists. This is the core of emotional triggering. It is not about the present moment. It is about the past moment that the present moment resembles. Your body does not know the difference between a physical threat and a social one, between a predator in the brush and a harsh word in a meeting. The same ancient system activates. Adrenaline is released. Cortisol floods your bloodstream. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for reasoning and choice, goes offline. You are no longer operating from the part of you that can think clearly. You are operating from the part of you that only knows how to react. And here is where most teachings about emotional regulation go wrong. They tell you to suppress the reaction. They tell you to stay calm, to think positive, to override what you are feeling with willpower. But suppression is not the same as awareness. Suppression is still a reaction. It is a reaction to your own reaction. You feel anger rising, and you push it down. You feel fear, and you tell yourself you should not feel it. This creates a secondary layer of tension, a fight within yourself that only deepens the original pattern. You have not dissolved the reaction. You have simply added shame to it. The body does not lie. When something activates you, the activation is real. Your heart is actually racing. Your muscles are actually contracting. Your breathing is actually shallow. These are not imaginary sensations. They are the biological signature of a nervous system in defense mode. And they need to be acknowledged, not denied. The question is not whether you will feel what you feel. The question is whether you will be aware of what you feel as it is happening, or whether you will be swept along by it, believing it to be the whole of reality. There is a difference between a feeling and a reaction. A feeling is a sensation in the body, a movement of energy that arises and, if left alone, will pass. A reaction is what happens when that feeling triggers a habitual behavior. You feel anger, and you lash out. You feel anxiety, and you reach for your phone. You feel sadness, and you isolate. The feeling itself is neutral. It is simply information. The reaction is where you lose your freedom. Most of your reactions are not responses to what is happening now. They are replays of what happened then. A person raises their voice, and suddenly you are 10 years old again, standing in a room where you were not safe. A project fails, and you are back in a moment when failure meant rejection. The present moment is collapsed into the past moment, and you respond not to what is, but to what was. This is the automaticity of the conditioned mind. It does not update. It does not adapt. It simply repeats. And repetition creates grooves. Every time you react in the same way to a similar trigger, you deepen the neural pathway that connects the trigger to that response. The groove becomes a canyon. What was once a choice becomes a compulsion. You no longer decide to react. The reaction decides for you. This is not a moral failure. It is a mechanical process. Your brain is wired to conserve energy, and repeating a known pattern requires far less energy than generating a new response. So it defaults. It automates. It hands you the same script you have been running for years, and you perform it without realizing you are on stage. But here is the crucial point: the fact that something is automatic does not mean it is inevitable. Automaticity can be interrupted. The pattern can be seen. And once it is seen, it begins to lose its grip. Not because you fight it, but because awareness itself creates space. When you see the reaction as it is forming, rather than being the reaction, you are no longer fully identified with it. You are standing slightly back, observing the machinery of your own mind. And in that small gap, a different possibility emerges. This is not about stopping your emotions. It is not about becoming a person who does not feel. The goal is not to eliminate anger, fear, or sadness. These are part of the human experience, and they carry important information. Anger can show you where a boundary has been crossed. Fear can alert you to genuine danger. Sadness can reveal what you have lost or what you care about. The emotions themselves are not the problem. The problem is the unconscious reaction that emotions trigger, the way they hijack your behavior and narrow your perception until you can see only one path forward, which is usually the same path you have taken 100 times before. When you begin to understand this, you stop treating your emotions as the enemy. You stop trying to be calm all the time, to think your way out of feeling, to perform a version of emotional control that is really just emotional avoidance. Instead, you start to develop a different relationship with what arises inside you. You begin to notice the sensation in your chest before it becomes a shout. You feel the tightness in your throat before it becomes silence. You observe the thought forming before it becomes a belief. And in that noticing, something shifts. You are no longer at the mercy of the pattern. You are in contact with it, which means you are also in contact with the possibility of choosing differently. The difference between now and habit is the difference between presence and automaticity. Now is always fresh. It is always unknown. Habit is stale. It is always a repetition of the past. When you are present, you are responding to what is actually in front of you. When you are operating from habit, you are responding to a ghost, a memory, a pattern that was laid down long ago and has nothing to do with the current situation. Most of your suffering comes from this confusion, from mistaking the ghost for the reality, from believing that your reaction to something is an accurate perception of it. But perception is not neutral. It is shaped by your history, by your wounds, by the conclusions you drew about yourself and the world when you were too young to question them. If you were taught that making mistakes is dangerous, then every error will feel like a catastrophe. If you learn that asking for help is weak, then every moment of need will feel like failure. If you absorb the message that you are too much or not enough, then every interaction will be filtered through that lens. You are not seeing what is. You are seeing what you expect to see, based on what you have already experienced. This is why the same situation can activate one person and leave another completely unbothered. It is not the situation itself that carries the charge. It is the meaning you assign to it, and that meaning is rooted in your past. Two people receive the same critical feedback. One hears it as useful information. The other hears it as confirmation of an old belief: I am not good enough. The feedback is identical. The interpretation is not. And the interpretation determines the emotional response, which determines the behavioral reaction. So when we talk about emotional triggering, we are really talking about the collapse of time. The past invades the present. The old story overwrites the new moment. And you react not to what is happening, but to what has always happened, at least in your internal world. This is the biology of reaction. It is not personal. It is not a sign of weakness. It is simply the way an unexamined nervous system operates. But examination changes everything. When you begin to see the pattern, you are no longer entirely inside it. There is a part of you that is watching, that is aware of the machinery in motion. And that awareness is not part of the machinery. It is the consciousness that precedes the reaction, the space in which the reaction occurs. And once you touch that space, even for a moment, you realize that you are not your reactions. You are the one who can observe them. This is the beginning of freedom. Not freedom from emotion, but freedom within it. Not freedom from the past, but freedom from being unconsciously controlled by it. You will still feel what you feel. The anger will still rise. The fear will still come. But you will not be swept away by it in the same way. There will be a pause, even if it is only a fraction of a second, in which you are aware that something is happening inside you, and that you have a choice about what to do with it. That pause is everything. It is the difference between a life lived on autopilot and a life lived with intention. It is the difference between being reactive and being responsive. And it is available to you, not as a distant goal, but as a present capacity. You do not need to become someone else to access it. You only need to become aware of who you already are beneath the layers of conditioning. The work is not to change yourself. The work is to see yourself. To see the patterns as they run. To feel the sensations as they arise. To notice the thoughts as they form. And in that noticing, to recognize that you are not the pattern, the sensation, or the thought. You are the awareness in which all of this is occurring. And awareness, unlike reaction, is not bound by the past. It is always here, always now, always available. This is where your power lives. Not in controlling what you feel, but in becoming conscious of it. Not in suppressing the reaction, but in seeing it clearly enough that it no longer defines you. The mind that reacts is the mind that believes it has no choice. The mind that responds is the mind that knows it does. And that knowing does not come from effort. It comes from attention. From the simple, steady practice of watching what is happening inside you without immediately acting on it. From learning to pause in the space between the trigger and the reaction, and discovering that in that space, you are free. Understanding this distinction requires looking more closely at how memory itself works in your nervous system. Every experience you have ever had leaves a trace. Not just in your conscious recollection, but in the tissue of your body, in the chemistry of your cells, in the patterns of electrical activity that fire across your neural networks. When something happens that resembles a past experience, your body remembers before your mind does. This is called implicit memory, and it operates completely outside of your awareness. You might not consciously recall the time you were humiliated in front of your classmates at age 7, but when someone laughs at something you said in a meeting 30 years later, your body remembers. Your stomach tightens in exactly the same way. Your face flushes with the same heat. Your voice catches with the same constriction. The memory is not a thought. It is a physical state, a bodily organization that recreates the conditions of that earlier moment. And because it happens so quickly, so automatically, you have no idea that you are responding to something that is not actually present. This is the hidden architecture of your emotional life. Beneath every strong reaction is a root system of earlier experiences, usually from childhood, when your nervous system was forming its basic understanding of what is safe and what is dangerous. A child who grows up in an environment where anger means violence will develop a hair-trigger response to any sign of irritation in others. A child who is repeatedly abandoned will react to any hint of distance in a relationship as if it is the end of the world. These are not conscious decisions. They are survival strategies that were adaptive once, but have now become prisons. The tragedy is that most people spend their entire lives being controlled by experiences they do not remember having. They react in ways that make no sense to them, that they wish they could stop, but they cannot seem to change. And this is because they are trying to change the behavior without understanding the structure beneath it. You cannot think your way out of an implicit memory. You cannot talk yourself out of a nervous system response. The only way through is to become aware of what is happening in your body as it is happening, to feel the activation as it rises, and to stay present with it long enough that it can complete and release. This is what it means to work with your emotions rather than against them. When anger arises, you do not push it down or act it out. You feel it. You notice where it lives in your body. You observe the heat, the tension, the surge of energy. You let it be there without doing anything about it. And this is much harder than it sounds, because every fiber of your conditioning is telling you to either suppress it or express it. To either make it go away or make someone else feel it. But both of these are reactions. Both of these are ways of avoiding the actual experience of the emotion. What happens when you stay present with an emotion without reacting to it is remarkable. The emotion begins to move. It rises, it peaks, and then, if you do not interfere with it, it falls. This is the natural cycle of emotional energy. Emotions are not solid things. They are waves. They have a beginning, a middle, and an end. But you only discover this if you are willing to stay with them long enough to let them complete. Most people never do. They intervene too quickly. They either shut the emotion down or let it explode outward, and in doing so, they interrupt the cycle. The emotion does not get to finish. It gets stuck, stored in the body as residual tension, only to be triggered again the next time something similar happens. This is why the same issues keep recurring in your life. You think you have dealt with your anger, but it keeps coming back. You believe you have moved past your fear, but it still controls you in subtle ways. This is not because you are broken. It is because the emotion was never fully processed. It was reacted to, but not experienced. And what is not experienced cannot be integrated. It remains as a fragment, a pocket of unfinished business in your nervous system, waiting to be activated. The path forward is not about becoming emotionless. It is about becoming more spacious with your emotions. It is about developing the capacity to feel deeply without being overwhelmed, to experience intensity without losing yourself in it. This is a skill, and like any skill, it can be developed. But it requires a fundamental shift in how you relate to your inner experience. Most people are at war with themselves. They judge their emotions as good or bad, appropriate or inappropriate, acceptable or shameful. This internal conflict creates a constant state of tension. You are simultaneously trying to feel and not feel, to be yourself and to be the version of yourself you think you should be. This is exhausting. And it is unnecessary. Because emotions, in themselves, are not the problem. The problem is the lack of awareness around them. The problem is the identification with them, the belief that what you feel is what you are. When you are identified with an emotion, you are inside it. You are the anger. You are the fear. You are the sadness. There is no separation, no distance, no perspective. And from that place, you have very few options. You can only react in the ways you have always reacted. But when you develop the capacity to observe your emotions, to feel them while simultaneously being aware that you are feeling them, something shifts. You are no longer inside the emotion. You are holding it. And what you can hold, you can work with. What you can observe, you are not enslaved by. This is not a metaphor. This is a literal shift in brain function. When you move from identification to observation, you activate different neural circuits. The prefrontal cortex comes back online. The amygdala, the part of the brain responsible for fear and defensive reactions, begins to calm. You regain access to the parts of yourself that can think clearly, that can choose, that can respond with wisdom rather than react with habit. This is the biological basis of emotional intelligence. It is not about controlling your emotions. It is about creating enough space around them that you are no longer controlled by them. And this space is always available. It does not require years of meditation or therapy, though both of those can help. It simply requires a willingness to stop in the middle of your reactivity and ask, what am I actually feeling right now? Not what am I thinking about, not what story am I telling myself, but what is the actual sensation in my body? Where do I feel this? What is its quality? Is it hot or cold? Tight or expansive? Sharp or dull? These are simple questions, but they redirect your attention from the narrative of the emotion to the felt sense of it. And in that redirection, you step out of automatic reactivity and into conscious presence. This is the practice. Not once, not when things are calm, but in the moment of activation. When someone says something that triggers you. When you receive news that upsets you. When you feel the familiar surge of an old pattern rising. That is when you pause. That is when you turn your attention inward, not to judge or fix, but simply to feel. To be with what is. To allow the reaction to be seen without being acted upon. And gradually, over time, something remarkable happens. The triggers begin to lose their power. Not because you have suppressed them or overcome them, but because you have brought consciousness to them. You have felt them fully, without resistance, and in that full feeling, they have completed. The charge dissolves. The pattern loosens. What once would have sent you into a spiral now registers as a mild sensation. You notice it, you acknowledge it, and you are able to choose how to respond rather than being hijacked by an automatic reaction. This is freedom. Not the absence of emotion, but the presence of choice. Not the elimination of triggers, but the ability to stay grounded when they arise. Not the achievement of perfect calm, but the cultivation of inner stability that can hold whatever comes without being shaken by it. This is what it means to move from reaction to response. To shift from a life governed by the past to a life lived in the present. To discover that the moment you can stand in, the moment you can be fully present with what is the moment in which you are free to choose. Chapter 2: The Gap Between Reaction and Response. There is a space that most people never find. It exists between what you feel and what you do. Between the impulse and the action. Between the storm inside you and the words that leave your mouth. This space is not empty. It is full of potential. It holds every possibility that is not the automatic reaction you have always chosen. But to access it, you must first believe it exists. And most people do not. They believe that feeling and doing are the same thing. That anger must lead to aggression. That fear must lead to withdrawal. That hurt must lead to defense. This is the logic of the reactive mind, and it is so deeply embedded in the way most people operate that they cannot imagine an alternative. They feel something, and they act on it, and they call this honesty. They call it authenticity. They call it being true to themselves. But it is not truth. It is simply habit dressed up as identity. The gap between reaction and response is where your freedom lives. It is the space in which you are not yet committed to a course of action, not yet locked into a pattern. It is the moment when everything is still fluid, when the future has not yet been determined by the past. And in that moment, if you can stay present, if you can resist the pull of automaticity, you discover something profound: you are not your impulses. You are the one who can choose whether or not to follow them. This is not a small realization. It is the foundation of all personal power. Because as long as you believe that your emotions control your actions, you are helpless. You are at the mercy of whatever happens to you, whatever triggers you, whatever old wound gets activated by the circumstances of your life. But when you discover that there is a gap, that there is a pause available between the feeling and the action, you step into a different relationship with yourself. You are no longer a victim of your inner weather. You are the witness of it. And from that position, you can choose. But choice is not the same as suppression. This is where most people misunderstand what it means to respond rather than react. They think it means controlling their emotions, overriding them with willpower, forcing themselves to behave in a way that is calm and measured even when they are boiling inside. This is not response. This is just a more sophisticated form of reaction. You are still being controlled by the emotion. You are just controlling your behavior in relation to it. And this creates a split within you, a dissociation between what you feel and what you show, which over time becomes its own kind of suffering. True response is not about control. It is about consciousness. It is about being fully present with what you are feeling, allowing it to be there, and then choosing your action from a place of awareness rather than compulsion. This requires a kind of inner steadiness that most people have never developed. It requires the ability to tolerate discomfort without immediately trying to make it go away. It requires the willingness to feel something intense and not be swept away by it. This is the power of the awareness moment. Not the moment when you successfully suppress your reaction, but the moment when you see it forming and do not act on it. The moment when you feel the anger rising and you do not lash out. The moment when you feel the fear gripping you and you do not run. The moment when you feel the sadness pulling you down and you do not isolate. In each of these moments, you are exercising a capacity that is more fundamental than any emotion, the capacity to be aware of your experience without being defined by it. Awareness is not passive. It is not a weak or neutral state. Awareness is active presence. It is the force that holds space for what is happening without collapsing into it. And when you bring awareness to a reaction, the reaction begins to change. Not because you are trying to change it, but because awareness itself is transformative. It interrupts the automatic loop. It introduces a different quality into the system. Where there was only impulse, there is now observation. Where there was only momentum, there is now stillness. And in that stillness, you begin to see something crucial. The emotion you are feeling is temporary, but the decision you make in response to it is permanent. The anger will pass. The fear will subside. The hurt will soften. But the words you spoke in anger, the opportunity you missed in fear, the relationship you damaged in hurt, these do not unhappen. The consequences of your reactions ripple forward in time. They shape your life in ways that far outlast the emotion that generated them. This is why the gap between reaction and response matters so much. It is not just about feeling better in the moment, though that is part of it. It is about the trajectory of your life. Every reaction you have reinforces a pattern. Every time you act on impulse, you deepen the groove that makes that impulse more likely to control you the next time. But every time you pause, every time you choose to respond rather than react, you weaken the pattern. You create a new pathway. You teach your nervous system that there is another way. Most people do not realize how much of their lives are determined by a few seconds of unconsciousness. A moment of anger that destroys a friendship. A flash of fear that causes them to turn down an opportunity. A surge of insecurity that makes them say something they cannot take back. These moments are small, but their impact is enormous. And they all hinge on whether or not you can find the gap, whether you can access that space between the trigger and the action where a different choice becomes possible. The gap is always there. It does not need to be created. It only needs to be recognized. But recognition requires something most people are not willing to give, their full attention. Because the gap is subtle. It is not loud. It does not announce itself. It is a quiet opening, a momentary pause in the momentum of your conditioning. And if you are not paying attention, if you are lost in thought or distracted or identified with the story your mind is telling, you will miss it entirely. This is why practice matters. You cannot wait until you are in the middle of a crisis to develop the capacity for awareness. You cannot expect to find the gap when you are flooded with adrenaline and your entire system is screaming at you to act. The time to practice is now, in ordinary moments, when the stakes are low and the pressure is manageable. You practice noticing your breath. You practice feeling your body. You practice observing your thoughts without getting caught in them. And slowly, over time, this capacity becomes available to you even in moments of high activation. The people who can stay calm under pressure are not people who do not feel pressure. They are people who have trained themselves to remain present with it. They have learned to find the gap even when everything in them is pushing them to react. And this is not a talent you are born with. It is a skill you develop through repeated practice, through failing and trying again, through gradually building the mental and emotional musculature that allows you to hold intensity without being overwhelmed by it. There is a profound psychological advantage to silent waiting. When you are triggered, your entire system is oriented toward action. Your body is mobilized. Your mind is racing. Your emotions are demanding expression. And the default mode is to discharge this energy outward, to do something, to say something, to make the discomfort go away by acting on it. But this is exactly the moment when action is most dangerous. Because you are not acting from clarity. You are acting from reactivity. And reactivity is almost always regrettable. Silent waiting is the practice of restraint in the presence of activation. It is the willingness to feel the full force of an emotion without letting it dictate your behavior. It is the decision to stay with the discomfort, to let it be there, to allow it to move through you rather than trying to move it out of you through impulsive action. And this is uncomfortable. Your body does not like it. Your mind protests against it. Every part of you is insisting that you need to do something right now. But this insistence is not wisdom. It is the voice of the conditioned self, the part of you that has always reacted, trying to maintain control. When you wait, you are not being passive. You are being strategic. You are recognizing that the first impulse is almost never the wisest response. You are giving yourself time for the prefrontal cortex to come back online, for the emotional flooding to subside, for the clarity that exists beneath the reaction to emerge. And this does not take long. If you can wait even 60 seconds, even 2 minutes, the entire quality of your state begins to shift. The intensity begins to decrease. The perspective begins to widen. And from that slightly calmer, slightly clearer place, a different response becomes available. This is not about denying what you feel. It is about not being enslaved by it. It is about recognizing that just because you feel something intensely does not mean you have to act on it immediately. The feeling can be honored. It can be felt. It can be acknowledged. But it does not have to be obeyed. And this distinction is everything. Because when you obey every impulse, you are not free. You are a puppet of your own nervous system. But when you can feel an impulse and choose not to act on it, you are exercising a kind of freedom that most people never experience. The gap between reaction and response is also the gap between who you have been and who you are becoming. Every time you react in the old way, you reinforce the old identity. You confirm to yourself and to the world that this is who you are. Someone who gets angry easily. Someone who avoids conflict. Someone who shuts down when criticized. These identities are not fixed. They are patterns. And patterns can change. But they only change when you stop feeding them. When you stop reacting automatically and start choosing consciously. This is why every moment of pause matters. Every time you find the gap, even for a second, you are weakening the old pattern and strengthening a new one. You are teaching yourself that you are not your reactions. You are the awareness that can observe them. And over time, this awareness becomes more stable, more accessible, more natural. It stops being something you have to force and starts being something you simply are. But this process is not linear. You will react. You will lose the gap. You will find yourself in the middle of an old pattern before you even realize what is happening. This is not failure. This is part of the process. The question is not whether you will ever react again. The question is how quickly you can catch yourself, how soon you can return to awareness, how much compassion you can bring to the moments when you fall back into old habits. Because self-judgment is just another reaction. When you berate yourself for reacting, when you tell yourself you should be better by now, when you spiral into shame about your lack of progress, you are still operating from the reactive mind. You are still identified with the pattern. True awareness includes awareness of the pattern of self-judgment. It holds even that with compassion, recognizing it as another conditioned response that does not need to be acted upon. The work is to keep returning. To keep finding the gap, over and over, in small moments and large ones, until the gap becomes more familiar than the reaction. Until the pause becomes more natural than the impulse. Until you reach a point where, in the heat of activation, some part of you remembers, there is another way. I do not have to do what I have always done. I can stay here, in this discomfort, and see what emerges. And what emerges is almost always surprising. Because when you are not following the script, when you are not reacting in the habitual way, life has room to respond to you differently. People respond to you differently. Opportunities that were never visible before suddenly appear. Solutions that could not arise in the midst of your reactivity begin to present themselves. This is the creative potential of the gap. It is not just about avoiding harm. It is about opening to possibility. When you react, you narrow your world down to a single path. The path you have always taken. The familiar groove. But when you respond, when you choose consciously from a place of awareness, you open to multiple paths. You consider options you could not see before. You access parts of yourself that were hidden beneath the reactivity. You discover resources you did not know you had. This is the psychological superiority of waiting. Not waiting for the sake of waiting, not hesitation born of fear or indecision, but conscious waiting that is rooted in the understanding that clarity comes from stillness, not from agitation. When you are agitated, you can only see what agitation can see, which is very little. But when you are still, even while the agitation is present, you can see more. You can feel more. You can sense the nuances of the situation that were completely invisible when you were caught in the reaction. And this seeing, this expanded awareness, is what allows for wisdom. Wisdom is not the same as knowledge. You can know a great deal and still be unwise. Wisdom is the capacity to respond to life in a way that is appropriate to the moment, that takes into account the full context, that considers consequences, that includes both your own needs and the needs of others. And wisdom only arises in the presence of awareness. It cannot come from the reactive mind. The reactive mind is too narrow, too fast, too committed to its habitual responses. Wisdom requires space. It requires the gap. So the practice is simple, though not easy. When you are activated, when you feel the surge of emotion that wants to become action, you pause. You do not suppress. You do not judge. You do not try to make the feeling go away. You simply stay present with it. You feel it in your body. You notice what it is asking you to do. And you do not do it. Not yet. You wait. You breathe. You allow the intensity to be there without acting on it. And you watch what happens. What happens is that the feeling changes. It softens. It shifts. It reveals layers you could not see when you were identified with it. And as it changes, your relationship to it changes. You are no longer at its mercy. You are no longer the feeling. You are the space in which the feeling is occurring. And from that space, you can choose. Not from the feeling, but from something deeper. From the part of you that is aware, that is present, that is not caught in the old pattern. This is the power of the gap. It is where transformation happens. Not in the absence of emotion, but in the presence of awareness. Not in the denial of impulse, but in the conscious choice not to follow it. Not in becoming someone who does not react, but in becoming someone who can see the reaction and choose something different. And every time you do this, every time you find the gap and stay in it, you are strengthening your capacity for freedom.
You are proving to yourself that you are not a prisoner of your conditioning. You are not doomed to repeat the same patterns forever. You can change. You can choose. You can become someone who responds to life rather than reacting to it. This is not about perfection. You will still react sometimes. You will still lose the gap. But gradually, over time, the gap becomes more accessible. The pause becomes more natural. The awareness becomes more stable. And you begin to live from a different place, a place that is not constantly hijacked by every trigger, every emotion, every old wound. You begin to live from the place that can hold it all, that can be with it all, and still choose wisely. This is the promise of the gap. This is what becomes possible when you discover that between the feeling and the action, there is a space. And in that space, you are free. Chapter 3: Emotional control does not equal suppression. There is a widespread confusion about what it means to have emotional control. Most people believe that control means not feeling. That it means maintaining a calm exterior regardless of what is happening inside. That it means pushing down the anger, swallowing the tears, hiding the fear behind a mask of composure. This is not control. This is suppression. And suppression is not strength. It is a form of violence you direct at yourself. When you suppress an emotion, you are essentially telling yourself that what you feel is wrong, that it should not be there, that you need to make it disappear. This creates an internal war. Part of you is feeling something real and urgent, and another part of you is trying to deny that reality. This split consumes enormous amounts of energy. It creates tension in your body, rigidity in your mind, and a sense of disconnection from yourself that over time becomes unbearable. The body keeps the score. This is not just a metaphor. When you suppress an emotion, it does not go away. It goes somewhere. It lodges in your tissues, in your muscles, in your organs. It becomes chronic tension in your shoulders, tightness in your jaw, a knot in your stomach. It manifests as headaches, as fatigue, as a vague sense of unease that you cannot quite name. And because the emotion was never processed, never allowed to complete its natural cycle, it remains active in your system, waiting for the next trigger to bring it back to the surface. This is why people who pride themselves on never getting angry often have sudden, explosive outbursts. This is why those who refuse to acknowledge their sadness sometimes find themselves weeping uncontrollably over something small. This is why the person who never shows fear can be paralyzed by anxiety in unexpected moments. The suppressed emotion accumulates. It builds pressure. And eventually, it finds a way out. Sometimes through the very behavior you were trying to prevent. Sometimes through physical symptoms. Sometimes through a slow erosion of your vitality and aliveness. True emotional regulation is something entirely different. It is not about making feelings disappear. It is about changing your relationship to them. It is about developing the capacity to feel fully without being overwhelmed, to experience intensity without losing yourself in it, to allow emotions to move through you rather than storing them or acting them out. This requires a kind of inner spaciousness that most people have never cultivated. It requires the ability to be present with discomfort, to tolerate strong sensations, to remain grounded even when everything in you wants to escape. The difference between suppression and regulation is the difference between closing a door and opening a window. When you suppress, you are trying to keep the emotion locked away, to pretend it is not there. But the room becomes airless. The pressure builds. You are using all your strength to hold the door closed, and you live in constant fear that it will burst open. When you regulate, you are allowing the emotion to be present, giving it space to breathe, letting it move and shift and eventually dissipate. The room remains open. The air circulates. You are not fighting against yourself. You are working with the natural flow of your inner experience. This openness is not weakness. It is profound strength. It takes courage to feel what you actually feel, to stay present with emotions that are uncomfortable, to resist the urge to either push them away or let them control you. Most people cannot do this. They swing between suppression and expression, between denying their feelings and being overwhelmed by them.
They have never learned that there is a third option: to witness. Witnessing is the capacity to observe your emotional experience without being fused with it. It is the ability to notice that you are angry without becoming the anger, to recognize that you are sad without collapsing into the sadness, to feel fear without being consumed by it.
This is not dissociation. You are not disconnecting from your feelings. You are establishing a different relationship with them. You are recognizing that emotions are experiences you are having, not identities you are inhabiting. This distinction is crucial. When you say "I am angry," you are identifying with the anger. You are making it your whole self. But when you say "I am experiencing anger," or "I notice anger is present," you are creating distance. Not the distance of avoidance, but the distance of perspective. You are acknowledging that the anger is real, that it is here, that it matters. But you are also recognizing that you are larger than the anger. That there is a part of you that can observe it, that can hold it, that is not defined by it. This observing capacity is innate. You were born with it. But it has been buried beneath years of conditioning that taught you to either suppress your emotions or be ruled by them. You were not taught that you could feel deeply and remain centered. You were not shown that it is possible to experience intensity without losing your grounding. And so you developed strategies that seem to work in the moment but have created long-term suffering. You learn to numb out, to distract yourself, to push feelings away. Or you learn to dramatize them, to amplify them, to use them to control others or justify your behavior. Neither of these is emotional regulation. Both are forms of reactivity. Real regulation begins with awareness. You cannot regulate what you are not aware of. If you do not know that you are angry until you have already slammed the door, until the words have already left your mouth, until the damage has already been done, then you have no opportunity to choose a different response. The anger has already hijacked you. It has already become behavior. But if you can catch the anger as it is rising, if you can feel it in your body before it becomes action, you have a choice. You can feel it fully and still choose what to do with it. This is where the practice of observing your emotions becomes essential. It is not enough to understand this intellectually. You must develop the actual capacity to notice what is happening in your inner world as it is happening. This means learning to recognize the early signs of activation. The slight quickening of your heartbeat. The subtle tension in your chest. The shift in your breathing. These are the body's signals that an emotion is beginning to form. And if you are paying attention, if you have trained yourself to be present with your physical sensations, you can catch the emotion in its early stages, before it builds momentum, before it takes over. Most people are completely disconnected from their bodies. They live in their heads, lost in thoughts and stories, and they only notice their bodies when something is seriously wrong. But your body is constantly giving you information about your emotional state. It is speaking a language that most people have forgotten how to hear. And without this somatic awareness, emotional regulation is nearly impossible. Because emotions are not primarily mental phenomena. They are bodily experiences. They are patterns of sensation, shifts in energy, changes in your physiological state. If you cannot feel your body, you cannot feel your emotions until they are so intense that they overwhelm you. So the first step in emotional regulation is coming back into your body. Learning to feel the subtle shifts in sensation. Practicing awareness of your breath, your posture, your muscle tension. This is not about analyzing or interpreting these sensations. It is simply about noticing them. About being present with the raw data of your experience before your mind turns it into a story, before you label it as good or bad, before you decide what you should do about it. When you develop this capacity for bodily awareness, you begin to notice something interesting. Emotions have a life cycle. They rise, they peak, and they fall. This is their natural rhythm. But most people interrupt this cycle. They either suppress the emotion before it can fully rise, cutting it off at the root. Or they amplify it through mental narrative, through rehearsing grievances, through building a case for why they have the right to feel this way. Both of these interventions prevent the emotion from completing its natural arc. What happens when you simply observe an emotion without interference is remarkable. You feel the sensation in your body. You notice where it lives, what its quality is, how intense it is. You stay present with it, breathing with it, allowing it to be there. And if you do not add fuel to it with your thoughts, if you do not try to make it go away, it begins to shift on its own. The intensity peaks and then gradually decreases. The sensation moves and changes. And within a few minutes, sometimes less, the emotional charge has dissipated. You are no longer activated. You are calm, clear, present. This is the power of allowing rather than resisting. When you resist an emotion, you lock it in place. Your resistance gives it something to push against, and it pushes back harder. But when you allow it, when you make space for it, it has nothing to fight. It can simply move through you and release. This is not the same as indulging the emotion, acting it out, or wallowing in it. It is about being with it without doing anything about it. About feeling it fully in your body without letting it become behavior. This practice requires what can only be called inner discipline. Not the discipline of control, but the discipline of presence. The discipline to stay with discomfort rather than reaching for the familiar escape routes. The discipline to feel rather than think. The discipline to witness rather than react. This is much harder than it sounds. Your entire conditioning is pulling you toward one of two extremes: suppress it or express it. To do neither, to simply be with it, goes against every habit you have built. But this is where true calm comes from. Not from the absence of emotion, but from the capacity to remain centered in its presence. Calm is not a state you achieve by avoiding intensity. It is a quality of consciousness you develop by learning to hold intensity without being disturbed by it. It is the inner steadiness that can remain even when everything else is turbulent. And this steadiness is not given to you. It is built. It is cultivated through repeated practice, through thousands of small moments in which you chose presence over reactivity. People often confuse calm with passivity. They think that being calm means not caring, not being affected, maintaining a kind of emotional distance from life. But this is not calm. This is dissociation. Real calm is highly alert, deeply present, and fully engaged. It is the opposite of checked out. It is checked in, but not hooked. It is feeling everything while being attached to nothing. This is the paradox at the heart of emotional regulation: you must feel more, not less, in order to be less controlled by what you feel. This is counterintuitive. Most people believe that if they really let themselves feel their anger or their fear or their grief, they will be overwhelmed by it. They are afraid that if they open the door even a crack, they will be flooded, swept away, unable to function. And so they keep everything locked down, using enormous amounts of energy to maintain control. But what they do not realize is that the fear of the emotion is often more overwhelming than the emotion itself. The resistance creates more suffering than the feeling would if it were simply allowed to be. When you actually sit with an emotion, when you feel it directly without the overlay of fear or judgment, you discover that it is manageable. It is intense, yes. It is uncomfortable, certainly. But it is not unbearable. Your body can handle it. Your nervous system can process it. You will not fall apart. You will not lose control. In fact, the opposite happens. By allowing the emotion to be fully present, you integrate it. You complete it. And in completing it, you free yourself from its grip. This is what emotional maturity looks like. It is not about never feeling difficult emotions. It is about having the capacity to feel them without being derailed by them. It is about being able to experience sadness and still function, to feel anger and still treat people with respect, to know fear and still take necessary action. The emotion is there, it is real, it is honored. But it is not in charge. You are. And this is only possible through the development of the observing self. The part of you that can step back and witness what is happening without getting lost in it. This is not a detached observer, removed from experience. It is an intimate observer, close to experience but not collapsed into it. It is the awareness that holds both the emotion and the space around it. And in that holding, there is freedom.
Most people have never been taught how to develop this capacity. They have been taught to manage their behavior, to control their expressions, to present a certain image to the world. But they have not been taught how to work with their inner experience. They have not been shown how to be with themselves in a way that is both compassionate and clear, both accepting and non-indulgent. And so they either become rigid, shut down, disconnected from their emotional life. Or they become reactive, volatile, at the mercy of every feeling that arises. The path of emotional regulation is the middle way between these extremes. It is neither suppression nor indulgence. It is presence. It is the willingness to feel without acting. To experience without being swept away. To acknowledge without amplifying. This requires practice. It requires patience. It requires a fundamental shift in how you relate to your inner world. You begin by noticing. Simply noticing. What am I feeling right now? Where do I feel it in my body? What is the quality of this sensation? These are not analytical questions. They are invitations to direct experience. You are not trying to figure out why you feel what you feel. You are not trying to change it or fix it. You are simply bringing awareness to it. And in that awareness, something shifts. The more you practice this, the more you realize that you have been living at war with yourself. Part of you wants to feel, and another part is terrified of feeling. Part of you wants to be authentic, and another part is committed to control. Part of you wants to be alive, and another part is trying to stay safe. This internal conflict is exhausting. And it is unnecessary. Because you can feel deeply and be safe. You can be authentic and be in control, not of your emotions, but of your response to them. You can be fully alive and fully grounded. This is the promise of true emotional regulation. Not a life without feeling, but a life where feeling does not control you. Not a personality that is cold or detached, but a presence that is warm and steady. Not the absence of intensity, but the capacity to hold intensity with grace. This is what becomes possible when you stop trying to suppress what you feel and start learning to be with it. And the most surprising discovery you make on this path is that emotions, when they are allowed to be felt fully, do not last as long as you thought they would. The anger that seemed like it would consume you dissipates in minutes if you do not feed it with your thoughts. The sadness that felt bottomless has a floor if you are willing to touch it. The fear that seemed overwhelming becomes manageable when you face it directly. What makes emotions seem endless is not the emotions themselves. It is your resistance to them, your avoidance of them, your attempts to control them without feeling them. When you learn to feel without reacting, you discover a kind of calm that is unshakable. Not because nothing bothers you, but because you know you can be bothered and still remain yourself. You know you can feel intensely and still choose wisely. You know you can be moved without being destabilized. This is the calm that comes from inner discipline. Not the discipline of suppression, but the discipline of presence. The discipline to stay with yourself, to be with yourself, to witness yourself without judgment or fear. This is the work. Not to become someone who does not feel, but to become someone who can feel anything and remain centered. Not to eliminate emotion, but to liberate yourself from being controlled by it. Not to achieve perfect calm, but to cultivate the inner steadiness that allows you to navigate whatever arises with clarity and wisdom. And it all begins with the recognition that control is not suppression. That you do not have to choose between feeling everything and feeling nothing. That there is a way to be fully human and fully present, to honor your emotions and honor your wisdom, to be vulnerable and strong at the same time. This is the path of emotional regulation. This is the freedom that awaits you when you stop fighting against yourself and start learning to be with yourself exactly as you are. Chapter 4: Remaining Clear Under Pressure. There are moments in life when another person's presence feels like a weight pressing against your chest. Their words, their tone, the very energy they bring into the room can feel like an invasion. And in those moments, something ancient inside you wants to push back. To defend. To strike first before being struck.
This is not weakness. This is biology. But biology is not destiny. This chapter is about what happens when you meet someone who destabilizes you.
Someone whose behavior or words seem designed to pull you off center. We will explore the mechanics of that pull, the architecture of your inner response, and the quiet power that becomes available when you learn to stand still in the storm another person creates.
We are not talking about suppressing what you feel. We are talking about meeting it fully, understanding its structure, and choosing what comes next.
The nature of triggering. When we say someone triggers us, we are describing a very specific event. Something outside of us makes contact with something inside of us, and the contact produces a reaction that feels both immediate and inevitable.
The reaction can be anger, fear, shame, or a more complex blend of emotions that we cannot quite name.
But the feeling of inevitability is what matters here. It feels as though the other person made us feel this way. As though they reached inside and flipped a switch. This perception is understandable, but it is not accurate.
What actually happens is more nuanced and more interesting.
The other person's behavior acts as a catalyst. It activates a pattern within you that was already there, waiting. This pattern was formed earlier in your life, often much earlier, in moments when you learned that certain behaviors or tones meant danger, rejection, or loss of control.
The pattern is a survival response.
It was useful once. It kept you safe or helped you navigate an environment that required quick, defensive reactions. But here is the critical insight: the person in front of you now is not the person who originally installed that pattern.
They are simply resonating with it. They are pressing on a nerve that is already sensitive.
And because the pattern is old, because it was formed when you had fewer resources and less understanding, the reaction it produces often does not match the reality of the present moment.
It is louder than it needs to be. It is faster than it needs to be. It is less precise than you are capable of being now. Understanding this does not make the feeling go away. But it begins to create space around it.
Space where choice can emerge.
The difference between reaction and response. Let us be clear about language. A reaction is automatic.
It is the nervous system's first answer to a perceived threat. It is fast, unfiltered, and shaped entirely by past experience. A reaction does not pause to ask whether it is appropriate or helpful.
It simply happens. You feel anger, and before you know it, your voice is raised.
You feel fear, and you withdraw or go silent. You feel shame, and you lash out or collapse inward.
These are reactions. They are not wrong. They are not signs of failure. They are human. A response is something different.
A response is what becomes possible when you create a small gap between what you feel and what you do.
It is not the absence of emotion. It is not cold detachment.
It is the presence of consciousness inside the emotion. You feel the anger, and you also feel yourself feeling it. You notice the heat in your chest, the tension in your jaw, the way your thoughts start to narrow and accelerate.
And in that noticing, you gain a degree of freedom.
Not freedom from the emotion, but freedom within it.
This is not about control in the way we usually think of it.
Control suggests force, effort, the clenching of a fist around something that wants to escape.
What we are describing here is more like balance. You are standing in the middle of a strong current, and you are learning to feel the current without being swept away by it. The current is real. The emotion is real. But you are also real, and you are larger than the emotion.
When you react, the past is in control.
When you respond, the present is in control. This is the shift we are working toward.
The architecture of inner balance. Inner balance in the presence of a triggering person is not a state you achieve once and then maintain effortlessly.
It is a practice.
It is something you build, moment by moment, through deliberate attention to what is happening inside you.
The first element of this balance is awareness. You must be able to notice when you are being activated.
This sounds simple, but it is not. Most of us are so accustomed to our patterns that we do not see them as patterns.
We experience them as reality.
Someone says something dismissive, and we feel instantly angry, and we believe the anger is simply the correct response to their behavior. We do not see that there is a story running beneath the anger, a story about what dismissiveness means, about our worth, about what we must do to protect ourselves. That story is so familiar, so deeply woven into our sense of self, that it is invisible. Awareness begins when you start to see the story as a story. When you can say to yourself, even silently, even just for a second, I am having a reaction right now.
My body is preparing to defend. My thoughts are narrowing. This is a pattern. That moment of recognition is everything.
It does not stop the reaction, but it introduces a witness. And the witness changes the entire dynamic.
The second element is grounding. When you are triggered, your attention moves upward and outward. Your thoughts race.
Your breath becomes shallow.
Your awareness is focused entirely on the threat in front of you.
Grounding is the practice of bringing your attention back into your body, back into the present moment.
You feel your feet on the floor. You notice the weight of your body in the chair. You take one breath that is slightly slower than the last one. These are not distractions. They are anchors.
They remind your nervous system that you are not in immediate physical danger, even if your emotions are telling you otherwise.
Grounding does not erase the emotion.
It gives you a place to stand while the emotion moves through you.
It is the difference between being a leaf in the wind and being a tree.
The wind still blows, but you are rooted.
The third element is space.
Once you have awareness and grounding, you can create space between impulse and action.
This space is very small at first. It might be only a second or two. But in that space, you have options.
You can choose to speak or to stay silent.
You can choose to engage or to step away.
You can choose to express what you feel in a way that is clear rather than in a way that is purely reactive.
This is not repression. Repression is pushing the emotion down, denying it, pretending it is not there. What we are describing is the opposite. It is feeling the emotion fully and then deciding what to do with it. This is the architecture of inner balance. Awareness, grounding, space. These three elements together create the conditions for response instead of reaction.
And in response, you reclaim your power.
Triggering people and the mirror they hold.
There is a particular kind of person who seems to have a gift for finding your weak spots. They may not be consciously trying to destabilize you, but their way of being in the world somehow collides with yours in a way that feels destabilizing. They might be dismissive where you need to be seen. They might be aggressive where you need to feel safe. They might be chaotic where you need order, or rigid where you need flexibility.
Whatever the specifics, the effect is the same. In their presence, you feel less like yourself.
It is natural to want to avoid these people or to label them as toxic and remove them from your life. And sometimes that is the right choice.
But not always.
Sometimes these people are part of your life in ways you cannot easily change.
They are colleagues, family members, neighbors.
And even when you can distance yourself from them, there is something valuable in understanding why they affect you the way they do. Because here is the uncomfortable truth: the people who trigger you the most are often showing you something about yourself that you have not fully integrated. They are holding up a mirror, and in that mirror, you see an aspect of yourself that you have disowned, or a need that you have not acknowledged, or a fear that you have not faced.
This does not mean they are right and you are wrong. It does not mean you should tolerate their behavior or excuse it. It means that your strong reaction to them is giving you information about your inner landscape. Let us take an example. Imagine someone who is very critical. Every interaction with them feels like a test you are failing.
Their tone is sharp, their feedback is harsh, and nothing you do seems good enough. Your reaction might be to feel defensive, to justify yourself, to try harder to win their approval, or to withdraw entirely. All of these are understandable reactions. But if you pause and look more closely, you might notice that this person is activating a belief you hold about yourself. A belief that says you are not good enough unless someone else confirms it. A belief that says your worth is contingent on external validation.
The critical person is not creating this belief. They are simply resonating with it. When you see this, the entire dynamic shifts. You are no longer fighting the person. You are meeting the belief. And the belief is something you can work with. You can question it. You can examine where it came from. You can decide whether you still want to carry it. This is deep work. It is not easy. But it is liberating. Because once you begin to disentangle your sense of self from the need for this person's approval, they lose their power to destabilize you. They remain who they are, but you are no longer hooked. This is not about blaming yourself for their behavior. It is about reclaiming your agency. It is about recognizing that while you cannot control how they show up, you can absolutely control how you meet them. Difficult conversations and emotional leadership. A difficult conversation is any exchange where the stakes feel high, where emotions are activated, where there is a risk of conflict or misunderstanding. These conversations are unavoidable in any meaningful relationship, whether personal or professional. And they are precisely the moments where the work of this book becomes most practical and most necessary. In a difficult conversation, there are usually two simultaneous processes happening. There is the surface process, which is the content of what is being discussed. The facts, the events, the decisions that need to be made. And there is the deeper process, which is the emotional and relational dynamic beneath the content. This deeper process includes what each person is feeling, what they are afraid of, what they need, and how they are interpreting the other person's words and behavior. Most people focus almost entirely on the surface process. They prepare their arguments, marshal their facts, plan what they will say. And they are then surprised and frustrated when the conversation goes off the rails, when emotions escalate, when nothing gets resolved. This happens because they are ignoring the deeper process. They are treating the conversation as if it is only about content when it is actually about connection, about safety, about being seen and understood. Emotional leadership in a difficult conversation means attending to both processes at once. It means being clear about the content while also being aware of the emotional field in the room. It means noticing when someone is becoming defensive, when trust is breaking down, when fear is taking over. And it means responding to those shifts in real time, not just with words but with presence, with tone, with the quality of your attention. This does not mean you become responsible for the other person's emotions. You are not. They are responsible for their own inner world just as you are responsible for yours. But you can choose to bring stability into the conversation even when they are bringing chaos. You can choose to stay grounded even when they are escalating. You can choose to listen deeply even when they are not listening to you. This is leadership. Not because you are superior or more evolved, but because you are choosing to operate from response rather than reaction. Let us be specific about what this looks like. Imagine you are in a conversation with someone who is angry. They are raising their voice, their words are sharp, and you can feel your own defensiveness rising. The reactive impulse is to match their energy, to defend yourself, to counterattack. This is understandable. But it is also predictable. And it almost never leads to resolution. The responsive approach is different. You notice your defensiveness. You feel the heat in your body, the urge to speak loudly. And you do not act on that urge immediately. Instead, you take a breath. You ground yourself. You remind yourself that their anger is not actually about you, even if it is directed at you. It is about something they are feeling, something they are struggling with. And then, from that grounded place, you speak. You might say something like, "I can see that you're really upset. I want to understand what's happening for you." This is not appeasement. It is not weakness. It is clarity. You are not agreeing with them or validating their anger as justified. You are simply acknowledging that it is present and that you are willing to meet it without becoming reactive yourself. This kind of response has a disarming effect. It interrupts the escalation cycle. It creates space for the other person to shift from attack mode to something more vulnerable, more honest. It does not always work. Some people are not ready to shift.
But it works far more often than defensiveness does.
And even when it does not change the other person's behavior, it changes yours. You remain in integrity. You do not say or do things you will regret later.
You stay connected to your own values even in the heat of conflict.
This is what emotional leadership looks like.
It is not about controlling the conversation or the other person.
It is about maintaining your own center and offering that stability as a resource in the room.
The social impact of response. How you show up in difficult moments has consequences that extend far beyond the immediate interaction.
Other people are watching, even when you do not realize it.
They are noticing how you handle pressure, how you treat people when you are upset, whether you can be trusted to stay steady when things get hard.
And they are making decisions about you based on what they see.
This is not about performing for others or trying to manage your image.
It is about recognizing that you are always teaching people who you are through your behavior.
When you react impulsively, when you lash out or shut down, you are teaching people that you are unpredictable, that you cannot be counted on in a crisis.
When you respond with clarity and presence, even when you are feeling difficult emotions, you are teaching people that you are solid, that you can hold complexity, that you are someone they can trust.
This matters in professional settings, where your ability to navigate conflict and pressure directly affects your effectiveness and your relationships with colleagues. But it matters even more in personal relationships, where trust and safety are the foundation of everything.
Your partner, your children, your close friends, they need to know that you can handle difficult emotions without becoming destructive.
They need to know that when things get hard, you will not abandon yourself or them.
This is not about being perfect. You will react sometimes. You will lose your balance. That is guaranteed.
But the overall pattern of how you show up matters. And when you do react, the way you repair matters.
Can you come back and acknowledge what happened? Can you take responsibility for your part without defensiveness? Can you make a different choice next time? This is the work of integrity.
And integrity, over time, builds trust. The personal impact of response. Beyond the social consequences, there is a deeper and more personal impact of learning to respond rather than react. Every time you pause in the face of a trigger, every time you choose awareness over automaticity, you are rewriting an old story. You are proving to yourself that you are not at the mercy of your patterns, that you have agency, that you are capable of something different. This is profoundly healing. Because most of our reactive patterns were formed in moments when we felt powerless. As children, as younger versions of ourselves, we did not have the resources we have now.
We reacted because reaction was all we had. But you are not that person anymore.
You are an adult with more capacity, more understanding, more options. And every time you demonstrate that to yourself through your behavior, you are updating your sense of who you are. This is not a linear process.
You will not steadily improve until you no longer react. There will be setbacks.
There will be days when you feel like you have learned nothing, when the old patterns take over completely.
This is normal. Growth is not linear. But if you stay with the practice, if you keep coming back to awareness and grounding in space, something shifts. The reactive moments become less frequent. They become shorter. They lose some of their intensity. And you begin to trust yourself in a new way.
You begin to trust that even when you feel strong emotions, you will not be destroyed by them. You begin to trust that you can stay present even when things are uncomfortable. You begin to trust that you have the capacity to meet difficulty without losing yourself. This trust is the foundation of inner strength. And it is built, moment by moment, through the practice of response.
Staying clear in the presence of chaos.
There will be times when the person in front of you is not just triggered but actively chaotic. They are not interested in resolution or understanding. They are venting, or attacking, or spiraling, and there is no stable ground to meet them on. In these moments, the work is not about changing them or fixing the situation.
The work is about maintaining your own clarity.
This requires a kind of detachment that is often misunderstood.
We are not talking about emotional coldness or disconnection. We are talking about the ability to be present with someone's chaos without being pulled into it.
You can witness their distress, you can feel compassion for them, and you can also remain separate.
You can hold the boundary between their inner world and yours. This is especially difficult when the chaotic person is someone you care about. It feels like abandonment to stay clear when they are falling apart.
It feels like you should jump in, fix it, absorb their pain, do something.
But this impulse, however well-intentioned, is often not helpful. Because you cannot fix another person's inner chaos. You can offer support, you can listen, you can be present. But you cannot do their work for them.
And if you try, you will often end up destabilized yourself, and then no one benefits.
Staying clear in the presence of chaos means knowing where you end and they begin.
It means recognizing that their emotions are theirs, not yours.
It means offering what you can offer without sacrificing your own stability. This is not selfishness. This is wisdom.
Because the most helpful thing you can do for someone who is drowning is not to drown with them.
It is to stay on solid ground and extend a hand.
The question beneath the conflict. In almost every difficult interaction, there is a question beneath the surface content. The question is usually not being asked explicitly, but it is driving the entire exchange.
The question is some variation of, do you see me? Do I matter to you? Am I safe with you?
Can I trust you? When you begin to hear these questions beneath the words, everything changes.
Because you realize that most conflict is not actually about the thing people are arguing about. It is about these deeper needs not being met.
The argument about who did the dishes is really about feeling unseen or unappreciated. The argument about money is really about feeling unsafe or out of control. The argument about plans is really about trust or autonomy or fear of being abandoned.
When you can hear the deeper question, you can respond to it directly.
You can say, in whatever way fits the moment, I do see you.
You do matter. You are safe with me.
This does not mean you agree with everything they are saying or that you do not have your own needs and boundaries.
It means you are addressing the real issue instead of getting lost in the surface drama. This is an advanced practice.
It requires you to stay very present, to listen not just to words but to what is underneath the words.
And it requires you to be secure enough in yourself that you can meet another person's vulnerability without becoming defensive.
But when you can do it, even occasionally, the quality of your relationships transforms.
Because you are no longer just managing conflict. You are building deeper connection. Conclusion: the moment you can stand.
Throughout this chapter, we have explored what it means to remain clear under pressure. We have looked at the mechanics of triggering, the distinction between reaction and response, the architecture of inner balance, and the social and personal impact of how you show up in difficult moments. All of this points to a single insight, simple in concept but profound in practice.
The moment you can stand is the moment you can choose. Standing does not mean suppressing what you feel. It does not mean pretending to be calm when you are not. It means being with what you feel without being swept away by it. It means feeling the impulse to react and not immediately acting on it.
It means staying present in your body, in this moment, with this person, even when everything in you wants to flee or fight or freeze.
This is not easy.
It goes against every instinct you have developed to protect yourself.
But it is possible. And it is worth it. Because in that moment of standing, you become free.
Not free from the emotion, but free within it. Free to see clearly, to choose wisely, to act from your deepest values rather than your oldest wounds.
This is the work. Not to become invulnerable, not to never be triggered, not to transcend your humanity.
But to develop the capacity to meet difficulty without losing yourself.
To stay connected to your center even when the world around you is pulling you off balance. To be both fully human and fully awake at the same time. The people who trigger you are not obstacles to this work. They are the training ground for it.
Every difficult conversation, every moment of pressure, every interaction that makes you want to react is an opportunity to practice standing. To practice choosing. To prove to yourself, again and again, that you are larger than your patterns, that you have agency,
that you are capable of something different. This is how inner strength is built. Not in the absence of challenge, but in the presence of it. Not by avoiding difficult people, but by learning to meet them without being undone. Not by transcending your emotions, but by developing the capacity to be with them and still choose your response. The moment you can stand is the moment you can choose. And in that moment, everything becomes possible. The practice of returning. There is something we must address clearly before we close this chapter, something that often goes unspoken in discussions of emotional mastery and inner strength. The practice of remaining clear under pressure is not something you perfect and then possess forever. It is not a skill you acquire once and then deploy effortlessly whenever you need it. It is a practice of returning. You will lose your center. You will react when you meant to respond. You will say things you wish you had not said, in tones you wish you had not used. You will watch yourself behave in ways that do not match your values, and you will feel the familiar disappointment, the sense that you have failed, that all this work was for nothing. This will happen. It is not a sign that you are doing it wrong. It is a sign that you are human. The practice is not about never losing your balance. The practice is about recognizing when you have lost it and choosing to return. This moment of return is where the real growth happens. Not in the moments when everything goes smoothly and you stay centered with ease, but in the moments after you have fallen apart, when you must decide whether to collapse into shame or to simply begin again. Shame is the enemy of growth. Shame tells you that because you reacted, you are fundamentally flawed. Shame tells you that people who truly have inner strength do not struggle the way you struggle. Shame tells you to give up, to stop trying, because clearly this work is beyond you. These are lies. Every person who has developed genuine emotional capacity has done so through countless cycles of losing balance and returning to it. There are no exceptions to this. The difference between people who grow and people who stay stuck is not that one group never fails. It is that one group knows how to return without drowning in self-judgment. When you notice that you have reacted, the first step is to pause. Not to immediately try to fix it or justify it or make it mean something about who you are. Just pause. Notice what happened. Notice what you feel now. Notice the impulse to either defend yourself or attack yourself, and do not act on either impulse yet. Just be with what is. The second step is to name what happened without drama. You might say to yourself, silently or aloud, I reacted. I got activated and I spoke from that activation. That is what happened. This is not the same as saying I am a terrible person or I always do this or I will never change. Those are stories. They are not helpful. What is helpful is simple, clear acknowledgement of the facts. The third step is to consider what you want to do about it. Sometimes the appropriate response is to repair. To go back to the person you were in conversation with and say something like, I spoke to you in a way that was not okay. I was reacting from something inside me, and I want you to know that I see that and I am working on it. This is not easy. It requires humility. But it is powerful. It models accountability. It shows that you are capable of owning your behavior without defending it or drowning in shame about it. Sometimes the appropriate response is not to repair with the other person but to learn from what happened. To ask yourself what triggered you, what pattern got activated, what you might do differently next time. This is not self-flagellation. It is curious investigation. You are studying yourself the way a scientist might study a phenomenon. Not with judgment, but with interest. And sometimes the appropriate response is simply to let it go. To recognize that you are tired, or overwhelmed, or dealing with something difficult, and that you do not have the capacity right now to process what happened. This is also okay. You can come back to it later when you have more resources. The practice of returning does not require perfect timing or perfect execution. It just requires willingness. The long view. When you are in the middle of a difficult interaction, when you are feeling triggered and trying desperately to stay grounded, it is hard to see beyond that moment. It feels urgent. It feels like everything depends on how you handle this one conversation, this one conflict,
this one person.
And in a sense, that is true. Each moment matters. Each choice shapes who you are becoming.
But it is also important to step back and take the long view.
To recognize that you are not just navigating this one difficult moment.
You are building a capacity that will serve you for the rest of your life. You are training your nervous system to tolerate discomfort without collapsing or exploding.
You are rewiring old patterns that no longer serve you.
You are becoming someone who can be trusted to stay steady, not because you never feel difficult emotions, but because you know how to be with them without becoming destructive. This work compounds over time. In the beginning, it feels effortful and clumsy.
You forget to pause. You notice you are reacting only after you have already reacted. You try to ground yourself and find that you do not know how, that your mind is too loud, that the emotion is too strong. This is normal. This is exactly how it is supposed to feel when you are learning something new.
But if you stay with it, if you keep practicing, something begins to shift. The pause starts to happen a little earlier.
You catch yourself in the middle of a reaction instead of after it is over. You notice the physical sensations of activation before they become overwhelming. You find that you can take a breath and feel it actually calm your nervous system instead of just being a gesture you were going through. These are small victories. They do not feel dramatic. But they are everything. Over months and years, these small victories accumulate. You find that you are less reactive than you used to be. Not because you have fewer triggers, but because your relationship to being triggered has changed. You are less afraid of your own emotions. You trust yourself more to handle them. And because you trust yourself more, other people begin to trust you more too. They see that you can hold complexity, that you do not need them to manage your emotions for you, that you are capable of staying present even when things are hard. This changes the quality of every relationship you have. The long view also helps you maintain perspective when you inevitably have setbacks. There will be periods where it feels like you are regressing, where you react more than you have in months, where all your practices seem to desert you. This often happens during times of high stress or transition, when your resources are depleted and your old patterns are more easily activated. If you are only looking at the immediate moment, these periods can feel devastating. But if you can hold the long view, you can see them as part of the natural rhythm of growth. You are not actually regressing. You are being shown what still needs attention. You are being given another opportunity to practice returning. The gift of difficult people. There is a perspective shift that can transform your relationship to difficult interactions, and it is this. The people who trigger you the most are offering you a gift. They are showing you exactly where your work is. They are illuminating the parts of yourself that are still reactive, still defended, still carrying old wounds. Without them, you might never see these parts clearly. You might carry them for your entire life, unexamined and unchanging. This does not mean you should seek out difficult people or tolerate abuse or stay in relationships that are harmful. Boundaries matter. Sometimes the right choice is to distance yourself from someone whose behavior is consistently destructive. But even in those cases, before you leave or after you have left, there is wisdom in asking yourself what that person activated in you and why. When someone is critical and you feel defensive, they are showing you that you are still looking for external validation, that some part of you still believes your worth is contingent on others' approval. When someone is dismissive and you feel enraged, they are showing you that you have not fully owned your own value, that you are still trying to convince others to see what you have not yet fully claimed in yourself. When someone is chaotic and you feel overwhelmed, they are showing you that you have not yet developed the capacity to maintain your own stability in the presence of instability. These are not comfortable realizations. It is much easier to blame the other person, to make them the problem, to focus on everything they are doing wrong. And often they are doing things wrong. Often their behavior is genuinely problematic. But that is not the point. The point is that your strong reaction is information. It is showing you something about your inner landscape that you might not otherwise see. When you can receive this information without defensiveness, when you can look at what is being activated in you with curiosity rather than shame, you gain access to deep healing.
You can begin to work with the parts of yourself that are still tender, still wounded, still operating from old survival strategies.
You can offer them compassion.
You can help them understand that they do not need to fight so hard anymore, that you have resources now that you did not have then, that you are safe in ways you were not safe before.
This is the gift of difficult people. They give you the opportunity to meet yourself more fully.
They show you where you are still fragmented, still at war with yourself, still trying to control outcomes you cannot control.
And in showing you this, they give you the chance to come home to yourself in a deeper way. Integration and wholeness. Throughout this chapter, we have been exploring the practice of remaining clear under pressure.
But there is a deeper purpose beneath this practice, and it is worth naming explicitly. The purpose is not just to become better at handling difficult people or to avoid conflict or to appear more composed. The purpose is integration.
It is becoming whole.
Most of us live in a state of internal fragmentation. We have parts of ourselves we are comfortable with and parts we have disowned or rejected.
We have emotions we allow ourselves to feel and emotions we push away.
We have needs we acknowledge and needs we pretend we do not have.
This fragmentation is exhausting. It requires constant effort to maintain.
And it keeps us from accessing our full capacity as human beings.
When you practice remaining clear under pressure, you are practicing being with all of yourself. You are learning to feel anger without becoming violent. You are learning to feel fear without collapsing. You are learning to feel sadness without drowning in it. You are learning that you can hold complexity, that you do not need to split yourself into good parts and bad parts, acceptable emotions and unacceptable emotions. You can be one integrated whole, even in the middle of difficulty.
This integration is what gives rise to genuine inner strength. Not strength as in hardness or invulnerability, but strength as in flexibility, resilience, the capacity to be fully present with whatever arises.
When you are integrated, you do not need to defend against your own experience. You do not need to pretend to be other than you are.
You can simply be, fully and completely, and meet life from that place of wholeness.
This is the work of a lifetime. It is not something you complete and then move on from.
It is something you deepen into, again and again, as life presents you with new challenges and new opportunities for growth. But every moment you practice, every time you choose awareness over automaticity, every time you return after losing your balance, you are moving toward greater integration.
You are becoming more whole.
And in that wholeness, you discover a capacity for presence and compassion and clarity that you may not have known you possessed.
Closing.
We end this chapter where we began, but with deeper understanding.
Pressure is inevitable. Difficult people are inevitable.
Moments when you feel triggered, when your old patterns activate, when you want to react rather than respond, these are inevitable.
This is not a problem to be solved. This is the texture of human life. What is not inevitable is how you meet these moments.
You can meet them unconsciously, from reaction, repeating the same patterns you have always repeated. Or you can meet them consciously, from response, choosing in each moment who you want to be and how you want to show up.
This choice is always available.
Even when it does not feel available, even when the reaction seems to happen before you can stop it, the choice is still there in the next moment.
The choice to return. The choice to begin again. The choice to stand. The moment you can stand is the moment you can choose. And the moment you can choose is the moment you reclaim your power.
Not power over others, but power over yourself.
Not power as control, but power as agency.
The power to be with what is, to feel what you feel, to act from your deepest values rather than your oldest wounds.
This is the invitation of this chapter and of this entire book.
To develop the capacity to remain clear under pressure. To build the inner architecture that allows you to meet difficulty without being destroyed by it. To become someone who can be trusted, by yourself and by others, to stay present when things get hard.
The work is simple but not easy.
It requires practice, patience, and a willingness to return again and again when you fall away from center.
But it is possible. And it is worth it.
Because in learning to remain clear under pressure, you do not just change how you interact with difficult people.
You change your entire relationship to being alive. You become more free, more whole, more capable of meeting life as it actually is rather than as you wish it would be. This is the path. Not away from difficulty, but through it.
Not around your triggers, but into them, with awareness and compassion and a commitment to choosing differently.
And on this path, step by step, moment by moment, you discover that you are stronger than you knew. Not because you never feel weak, but because you can feel weak and still choose to stand. And in that standing, you find yourself. Chapter 5: The Power of Non-Reaction. There is a particular kind of power that most people never discover. It is not the power of force or dominance. It is not the power of winning arguments or controlling outcomes. It is quieter than that, and far more effective. It is the power that emerges when you choose not to react. This may sound passive. It may sound like weakness or avoidance. But nothing could be further from the truth. Non-reaction is not the absence of response. It is the presence of choice. It is what becomes possible when you have enough inner stability to feel an impulse without immediately acting on it, to be provoked without being controlled by the provocation. Most people move through life in a state of constant reaction. Someone says something hurtful, and they immediately defend or attack. Someone challenges them, and they immediately justify themselves. Someone pushes their boundaries, and they either collapse or explode. These reactions are automatic. They happen before conscious thought can intervene. And because they are automatic, they are predictable. And because they are predictable, they can be manipulated. When you develop the capacity for non-reaction, you step out of this pattern entirely. You become unpredictable in the best possible way. You cannot be baited. You cannot be controlled through provocation. You maintain your center regardless of what energy is being directed at you. This is power. Real power. The kind that does not need to announce itself or prove itself. The kind that simply is. This chapter explores what non-reaction actually means, how it functions, and why it is one of the most sophisticated forms of emotional intelligence you can develop. We will look at silence as a strategic tool, at how self-respect manifests in behavior, and at the freedom that comes when you learn to be with your emotions without being ruled by them. Understanding non-reaction. Let us start by being very clear about what non-reaction is not. It is not suppression. It is not pretending you do not feel anything. It is not swallowing your anger or hurt and carrying it inside where it can fester and poison you. It is not being nice when you want to scream. It is not putting on a calm face while your nervous system is in chaos. Those are forms of repression, and repression is not strength. It is fear dressed up as composure. Non-reaction is something entirely different. It is the ability to feel everything and choose what you do with those feelings. You feel the anger. You notice the heat in your chest, the tightness in your jaw, the way your thoughts start to narrow and accelerate. You feel it fully. And then, instead of immediately expressing it or acting on it, you pause. You create space. You ask yourself what response would actually serve you in this moment, what would be aligned with your values, what would move you toward the outcome you genuinely want. This pause is everything. In that pause, you are no longer at the mercy of your emotional state. You are no longer being driven by impulse or old patterns or the need to discharge tension immediately. You are present. You are conscious. And from that place of consciousness, you have options. The person who reacts automatically is easy to predict and easy to control. If you know someone always gets defensive when criticized, you can manipulate them by offering criticism. If you know someone always tries to prove themselves when challenged, you can manipulate them by issuing challenges. Their automatic reactions make them controllable. They hand their power over every time they react without thinking. The person who has cultivated non-reaction is different. You cannot predict how they will respond because they are not operating from a fixed pattern. They might respond with words, or with silence. They might engage deeply, or they might walk away. They might express emotion, or they might remain neutral. What they do depends not on what you did to them,
but on what they have chosen after considering the situation. This unpredictability is unsettling to people who are used to controlling others through provocation. And it is liberating to the person who has developed it. Non-reaction does not mean you never respond. It means you respond consciously rather than unconsciously. It means you are the author of your response rather than its victim. This is a profound shift in agency, and it changes everything about how you move through the world. The architecture of silence. Silence is one of the most powerful tools available to you, and it is also one of the most misunderstood. In a culture that values constant communication, constant sharing, constant expression, silence can feel like failure. It can feel like you are not standing up for yourself, not participating, not mattering. But this is a misreading of what silence actually is and what it can do. Strategic silence is not the absence of communication. It is a very specific form of communication. When you choose silence in a moment where others expect you to react, you are communicating several things at once. You are communicating that you are not controlled by their expectations. You are communicating that you do not need to defend yourself immediately. You are communicating that you are comfortable with tension, with not filling every gap, with letting things be unresolved for a moment or an hour or a day. This kind of silence creates space. It gives you time to think, to feel, to consider your options. It gives the other person time to sit with what they have said or done without getting an immediate reaction that allows them to escalate or deflect. It changes the entire dynamic of the interaction because it refuses to play the expected role in the expected pattern. Consider what happens in a typical argument. Someone says something provocative. The other person immediately responds, usually with equal or greater provocation. The first person responds to that, and the cycle continues, escalating with each exchange. Both people are reacting. Neither is choosing. The argument takes on a life of its own, and by the end, both people have said things they regret, and nothing has been resolved. Now consider what happens when one person breaks this pattern with silence. Someone says something provocative. Instead of responding immediately, you pause. You feel what you feel. You look at the other person. You wait. The silence stretches. It becomes uncomfortable. The other person does not know what to do with it. They were prepared for your reaction. They were not prepared for your presence. In that silence, several things become possible. The tension of the moment becomes visible. The provocation hangs in the air, and the person who offered it must sit with it. They cannot immediately move on to the next thing because you have not given them the next thing to respond to. They are forced to be with what they just said or did. And sometimes, in that forced pause, something shifts. They realize how they sounded. They feel the aggression or unfairness of their words. They have a chance to soften, to reconsider, to try again. This does not always happen. Some people will simply escalate further, trying to provoke you into breaking your silence. But even then, your silence has power. It shows them that you cannot be controlled. It shows them that their provocation did not work. And it gives you the space to decide how you actually want to respond, if you want to respond at all. Silence is also powerful because it forces you to be comfortable with discomfort. Most people react immediately because they cannot tolerate the tension of not reacting. The emotion is too strong. The impulse is too urgent. The need to discharge it, to do something with it, is overwhelming. But when you learn to sit in that tension, when you learn to be with the impulse without acting on it, you develop a capacity that serves you in every area of your life. You become someone who can tolerate uncertainty, who can sit with difficult emotions, who does not need to resolve everything immediately. This is maturity. This is emotional sophistication. Of course, silence can also be misused. It can be weaponized as a form of punishment, as a way to withhold connection or create anxiety in others. This is not what we are describing here. Strategic silence is not about hurting or controlling others. It is about maintaining your own center, about giving yourself the space to choose your response rather than being driven by reaction. If your silence is coming from a place of wanting to make someone suffer, that is not non-reaction.
That is passive aggression. The difference is in your intention and your awareness. When not to speak. There are specific situations where silence is not just useful but necessary.
Learning to recognize these situations is part of developing emotional intelligence and strategic thinking.
The first is when you are angry in a way that clouds your judgment. Not all anger is the same.
There is anger that is clear and righteous, anger that arises from a genuine boundary violation and carries with it a sense of what needs to be said or done.
This kind of anger can be expressed and acted upon.
But there is also anger that is muddied, anger that is really about something else, anger that is disproportionate to the situation because it is carrying the weight of old wounds or unmet needs.
When you are in this second kind of anger, speaking is almost always a mistake. You will say things you do not mean.
You will make the situation worse. You will give ammunition to anyone who wants to use your words against you later.
The way to tell the difference is simple. Clear anger has a quality of focus. You know exactly what the problem is and what needs to happen. Muddied anger is diffuse. You feel rage but you cannot quite articulate why, or you find yourself bringing up old grievances, or you are angrier than the situation warrants. When you notice this muddied quality, the wise choice is silence. Wait until the anger settles. Wait until you can see clearly again. Then speak, if speaking is still necessary.
The second situation where silence is essential is when the other person is trying to provoke you.
Some people are skilled at pushing buttons.
They know exactly what to say or do to get a reaction, and they do it deliberately. Sometimes this is conscious manipulation. Sometimes it is their own unconscious pattern, a way they have learned to feel powerful or to avoid their own discomfort.
Either way, the dynamic is the same.
They say or do something provocative, you react, and they get what they want, whether that is a fight, or your attention, or proof that you are unstable. When you recognize this pattern, silence breaks it completely.
They push. You do not react.
They push harder.
You still do not react. They do not know what to do.
Their strategy stops working. And often, in the absence of your reaction, they have to face themselves, their own behavior, their own motivations. This is deeply uncomfortable for them, and it often leads to change, either in how they treat you or in their decision to spend less time with you.
Either outcome is better than the endless cycle of provocation and reaction.
The third situation is when speaking would betray your own integrity. There are moments when you are asked or pressured to say something that is not true, or to agree with something you do not agree with, or to go along with something that violates your values. In these moments, silence is a form of refusal. It is a way of saying no without engaging in an argument you cannot win or do not want to have. You simply do not participate.
You do not sign on. You do not add your voice to something you do not believe in.
This kind of silence can be lonely.
It can make you unpopular.
It can cost you opportunities or relationships. But it preserves something essential, which is your relationship with yourself. When you speak against your own knowing, when you say things you do not mean or agree with things you do not believe, you fragment yourself. You create a split between who you are and how you present yourself to the world. Over time, this split becomes unbearable. Silence, in these moments, is not weakness. It is self-preservation.
It is integrity. Self-respect and behavior. Self-respect is not an abstract concept. It is not something you feel or think about. It is something you do.
It is expressed entirely through your behavior, through the choices you make about what you will and will not tolerate, about how you allow yourself to be treated, about what you do when someone crosses a line. Many people believe they have self-respect because they think of themselves as worthy or valuable. But if their behavior does not reflect this, if they consistently allow themselves to be treated poorly, if they react to every provocation, if they give their energy to people who do not reciprocate or respect them, then they do not actually have self-respect. They have a concept of self-respect.
And a concept is not the same as the lived reality. Self-respect manifests in non-reaction in very specific ways.
When someone treats you poorly, Self-respect does not require you to punish them or teach them a lesson or make sure they understand what they did wrong.
It simply requires you to not continue engaging as if everything is fine. This might mean you become quieter with that person. It might mean you create more distance. It might mean you stop investing energy in the relationship. It does not require drama or confrontation.
It simply requires that you adjust your behavior to match the reality of who they are showing themselves to be. This is often harder than it sounds because we are taught that self-respect means standing up for ourselves, which is often interpreted as fighting back, as making sure the other person knows they cannot treat us that way. But this approach often keeps you entangled with people who do not deserve your energy. You end up spending enormous amounts of time and emotional resources trying to make someone see you or value you or treat you differently. And the sad truth is that people who do not respect you will not suddenly start respecting you because you argued well or explained clearly or stood your ground in a conflict. They will only respect you when they see that you respect yourself enough to walk away from situations that diminish you. Non-reaction in the context of self-respect means you do not try to change people who have shown you they are not capable of or interested in treating you well. You simply adjust your expectations and your investment accordingly. You become less available. You share less. You care less about their opinion. This is not bitterness. It is clarity. You are recognizing reality and responding to it appropriately. There is a particular grace in this approach. You are not making the other person wrong. You are not attacking them or trying to make them feel bad. You are simply withdrawing your energy and placing it elsewhere, in relationships and pursuits that actually nourish you. This is self-respect in action. It is quiet. It is dignified. And it is far more powerful than any confrontation. Self-respect also means you do not over-explain yourself. When you have decided something, when you have set a boundary or made a choice, you do not need to justify it endlessly or convince others that it is valid. You simply state it clearly and then stop talking. If someone pushes back, if they try to argue you out of your boundary or question your decision, you do not engage in that argument. You simply repeat your position, calmly and without elaboration, and then you stop talking again. This can feel uncomfortable at first. We are used to feeling that we owe people explanations, that we need to make them understand, that our boundaries are only valid if others agree they are reasonable. But this is not true. Your boundaries are valid simply because they are yours. They do not require anyone else's approval. And when you stop seeking that approval, when you stop over-explaining and justifying, you communicate something powerful, that you are comfortable with your own authority over your own life. The social dimensions of non-reaction. How you handle provocation and conflict does not just affect your immediate relationships. It affects how you are perceived and what opportunities become available to you. This is especially true in professional contexts, but it is also true in any social environment where you interact with the same people over time. People are always watching how others respond to pressure. They may not be doing it consciously, but they are gathering data about who can be trusted, who stays steady, who loses their composure, who can be manipulated. When you consistently react to provocation, when you are easily baited or predictably defensive, people notice. They may not say anything, but they catalog this information. And when decisions are being made about who to trust with responsibility, who to include in sensitive conversations, who to rely on when things get difficult, that information matters. Conversely, when you demonstrate the capacity for non-reaction, when people see that you cannot be easily provoked, that you stay clear even when things are tense, that you do not participate in drama or petty conflicts, you become someone who is valued differently. You become the person others come to when they need stability. You become the person who is trusted with more complex and sensitive situations because you have shown you can handle them without making them worse. This is not about building a reputation for its own sake. It is about the natural consequences of emotional maturity. When you develop the capacity to remain centered under pressure, opportunities naturally flow toward you because you have become someone who can hold space for complexity, who can navigate conflict without adding fuel to it, who can be counted on to not make situations more volatile than they already are. There is also a protective element to this. When you are known as someone who does not react, you become less of a target.
People who enjoy creating drama, who feed on conflict and emotional reactivity, lose interest in you because you do not give them what they are looking for. They move on to easier targets. This means you spend less time dealing with unnecessary conflict and more time focused on what actually matters to you. In professional environments specifically, the ability to remain non-reactive is often the difference between being seen as competent and being seen as a leader. Competence is about doing your job well. Leadership is about being able to maintain clarity and stability for others when things are uncertain or difficult. You cannot lead if you are reactive because no one will trust you to guide them through challenging situations. They need to know that you will not panic, that you will not lash out, that you will not make decisions from a place of emotional overwhelm. Non-reaction is not the only quality of leadership, but it is a foundational one. The freedom in feeling. We arrive now at what may be the most important insight of this entire chapter. The goal is not to stop feeling emotions. The goal is not to become emotionless or detached or unaffected by life. The goal is to be able to feel everything without being controlled by what you feel. This distinction is everything. Most people are afraid of their own emotions. They are afraid that if they really let themselves feel anger, they will become violent. They are afraid that if they let themselves feel sadness, they will fall apart and never recover. They are afraid that if they let themselves feel fear, they will be paralyzed. And so they spend enormous energy trying not to feel, trying to push emotions away or numb them or distract themselves from them. This does not work. The emotions do not go away. They just go underground where they continue to exert influence, often in ways that are more destructive than if they had been felt and processed directly. The alternative is to develop the capacity to feel fully while maintaining consciousness. You let the anger come. You feel it in your body. You notice what it wants you to do. And you do not immediately do that thing. You stay with the feeling. You let it move through you. You give it space to exist without giving it permission to control your behavior. This is not suppression. This is presence. You are fully with the emotion, but you are also larger than the emotion. You contain it rather than being contained by it. This is difficult work. It goes against every instinct you have developed to protect yourself from discomfort. But it is also liberating beyond measure. Because when you discover that you can feel intense emotions without being destroyed by them or acting destructively because of them, you become free. You are no longer afraid of your own inner world. You do not need to avoid situations that might bring up difficult feelings because you trust yourself to handle those feelings. You do not need to control others or control circumstances to keep yourself feeling safe because you are safe within yourself. This freedom changes everything about how you relate to life. You can take risks because you are not afraid of failure bringing up shame that will overwhelm you. You can be honest because you are not afraid of conflict bringing up anger you cannot handle. You can be vulnerable because you are not afraid of rejection bringing up pain that will destroy you. You know that whatever you feel, you can be with it. And in that knowing, you become truly powerful. The statement that opens this closing is deliberate: the emotion you cannot control controls you. When you are unable to be with an emotion without immediately reacting to it, you are being controlled by it. It is deciding what you say, what you do, how you show up. You are not free. You are a puppet to your emotional state, and anyone who knows your patterns can pull the strings. But the emotion you can be with, the emotion you can feel fully without being driven by it, becomes a source of information and energy rather than a source of control. Anger, when you can be with it without reacting from it, tells you where your boundaries are being violated and gives you the energy to protect them. Fear, when you can be with it without being paralyzed by it, tells you what matters to you and what you need to prepare for. Sadness, when you can be with it without being overwhelmed by it, connects you to your losses and to what you value. Every emotion has intelligence in it. But you can only access that intelligence when you are not being controlled by the emotion.